Out of the many graphic novels that you have written, which would you say was the most enjoyable to write, and why?
I think my favorite of all the graphic novels to write was probably a book called Mr. Punch, which was an adult graphic novel, and it's not one of the most famous or anything, but it was a book that was really about me, age 6, 7, 8, and going to see my grandparents and what my grandparents were like. And there's all of that kind of stuff, weird family legends and family memories. And that was just, it was a joy to write. It was a joy to recreate my grandparents, to recreate this lost world. And then knowing that Dave McKean, who is just the world's coolest comics artist, was gonna draw it, made it even more fun. So that was my favorite to write.
Are you going to write any more standalone Death books?
I don't know. If ever I get an amazing idea for a standalone Death story where I go, yes, of course, that's her story, I will do it. The problem with Death is she's too clever a character. And mostly, it's really easy to write stories about characters who aren't very bright, even if they're really intelligent, but who just sort of don't get out of the way when they see a story coming. Whereas Death is a really smart character. And in order to make a story work, you have to give somebody problems. She doesn't really have problems. She's pretty much has things worked out. And I did the whole story of, okay, you get to be alive for 24 hours. And that was so much fun, because then I got to give her problems, and then I got to make stuff happen. But that was sort of the moment that I came up with that idea. I went, well, that's a graphic novel. If ever I come up with another idea and I go, aha, that's a graphic novel for Death, I would write it like a shot, because she's so much fun to write. She's in the new, I'm doing this new 6-issue Sandman story right now, and she's in the first issue, and just writing her dialogue made me happy.
Would you say that you have based any of your characters on yourself?
I based any of my characters on myself, yes, but fewer than you would think. In Sandman, I think Sandman 24, in the middle of Season of Mists, there's a kid called Charles Rowland at a school when the dead come back. And that was pretty much me. You know, he at least while he was still alive, he was pretty much me, aged 11, 12. And the narrator, the lead character in my new novel for adults, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, is pretty much me. Not quite, you know, you sort of, you take yourself and you twist the dial a little and you change things as much as you need to, but they're pretty much me.
Yeah, so in American Gods, there are lots of references to like mythology and like folk form.
Mm-hmm.
How did you like go about researching into all the cultures and stuff?
Well, 95% of the research I did by being the kind of person who loved mythology from when I was very small. So there was a lot of research that I was doing for American Gods I didn't know was research for American Gods. I just knew that I was loved reading myths. I would buy books with titles like, you know, Australian mythology, North American mythology, whatever, just because I wanted to find out the stories and find out about the gods. When I came to write American Gods, I realized I didn't know anything very much about the old Russian Slavic gods, and I had to research them. And researching them was really hard because there wasn't actually an awful lot known about them. And what I discovered was that they're pretty much, the Russian Orthodox Church managed to stamp out of existence an enormous amount of information about the old Slavic gods, which meant that stuff that I actually made up in American Gods has now worked its way back into the Wikipedia world and back into works of mythology, and they now think this is stuff that goes back in Slavic mythology forever, and it's not. It's just stuff I made up in 1999.
And how did you start out writing, and what were your main inspirations?
I started out writing, I was about 21, I think, when I started. And I just wrote a book. I went, I want to be a writer, and I wrote a book. And I taught myself to typing the book out. And I sent it out to a publisher, and it came back. And I was so devastated by this. I thought, I thought the first publisher I sent it to would go, yes, we want to publish your book. And they didn't. So obviously I'm doing something wrong. I need to figure out how this works, what the system is, how does writing happen. So I got up the next morning and went, right, I'm now a journalist. And I was. And for the next 3 or 4 years, I was a journalist specializing in publishing, in science fiction and fantasy and horror. All the things I was interested in, basically, because if you're a journalist, you can ask anybody any questions you like, and they don't mind. They'll just answer them because you're a journalist. It's magic. It's like asking people to make funny faces when you're a photographer. They will, because you're a photographer. So I got to interview people, and I got to talk to people, and I got to learn how things worked. And somewhere during the course of that, I wrote my first 2 books, which were non-fiction books. And then I wrote another non-fiction book, and then somewhere in there I was doing Sandman and writing Good Omens with Terry Pratchett, and I looked around and I had a writing career.
Would you say you prefer writing children's books or writing for screen?
What I like is being allowed to do everything. Back when I was a journalist, I would talk to writers, some of them very important writers, some of them very famous writers. And there would always come a point where they'd start, the famous crime writer would start telling you about his French Revolution novel that nobody would publish, or the love story that nobody would publish, or whatever. And I'd go, and so many writers would tell me they'd written a children's book that publishers weren't interested in. And I thought, I want to be a writer who just gets to do whatever he wants. And that was always very important to me. And sometimes it was important enough that I wouldn't do the same thing twice, even when I wanted to. Because I go, let's move around a bit. And what I love now is that they let me do anything. They let me write comics, they let me write prose, they let me write books for adults, they let me write books for kids, they even let me write episodes of Doctor Who, if I ask them nicely, which I think is about as good as it gets for a writer.
If you could be any of Dream's relatives, which one would you be?
They're all pretty mad. Death is the only one who is just actually has her act together. Destin is a little bit too distant and weird. Probably Destruction, just because he seems to have his heart in the right place. Once you get past Destruction, they get really strange. Possibly it might be nice if I could be sort of some hitherto undiscovered member of the family. I could be Desmond or something.
Okay.
I heard something about the American Gods HBO series or movie. Did there still anything about that?
Definitely not happening with HBO, definitely happening somewhere else that I'm not at liberty yet to talk about.
Being a journalist, who would you say was the most enjoyable / interesting person you ever spoke to and why?
Great question. The funny thing is, some of the ones that were the most enjoyable and interesting weren't necessarily the nicest. Because there were people who I made friends with who I don't look back on and go, well, that was great interview or great article. And then there were people who I thought weren't even terribly nice, but the article was fantastic. But the person who probably was both in my world, and who also, looking back on it, changed my life in a lot of very interesting ways. And I look back and I go, well, if I hadn't have interviewed him, this wouldn't have happened, and that wouldn't have happened. And with whom I became friends was Douglas Adams, author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the books that followed that. And Douglas was one of the very, very first people I interviewed when I was a journalist. There's a photo of me, age 22, interviewing Douglas. And because I did those early interviews, I wound up doing a book called Don't Panic, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Companion, which was my first sort of big hit as a book, which got me my American agent, and we've been together now for 25 years, she and I. And it gave me a friendship with Douglas Adams, who was an inspiration and a remarkable man. And these days, his daughter, Polly, is one of my best friends. And I go, well, none of that would have happened if I hadn't, as a 22-year-old journalist, met and interviewed Douglas Adams. And in fact, I'm putting something incredibly brilliant that Douglas said to me 20-something years ago into the speech tonight. And what I think is most interesting about that is the conversation which I'll relay a little bit of in the speech tonight, was before ebooks. And we're talking about ebooks and what they are and what they'll do, and he got everything right. But we also talked about why they will never replace the book, any more than television replaced the movies. I think it's you next.
Why did you call your last novel, Unfortunately, The Milk?
Fortunately, The Milk. It's not unfortunately, it's Fortunately, The Milk. It's called Fortunately, The Milk because I thought there's never been a book called Fortunately, The Milk in the whole of human history. And it's a sort of odd little title, and it will make people smile. And I just had this idea that all the way through the book, long before, what was fun is before the book was ever plotted, I knew three things about the book. I knew the kind of book it would be. I knew that Dad was going to go out to get milk for his kids' cereal, and he was going to come back, and there were going to be amazing adventures. But all the way through those adventures, he would just, every time things got really dangerous, he would say something like, fortunately, I was holding the milk tightly in my right hand when they shot off my left hand. Fortunately, the milk was in my pocket. And sometimes, unfortunately, things happen. At one point, there is an unfortunately, the milk falls out of his hand into a volcano, but falls into a drift of lava dust, and it does get rescued after they've gone backwards and forwards in time and met some very intelligent ponies.
What was it like working with Terry Pratchett for Good Omens?
Terry Pratchett is a genius, and a master craftsman. And I would have been about 27, and I'd finished writing the book on Douglas Adams, Don't Panic, and I'd really enjoyed the thing of writing in a style which I suppose you could call classic English humor. And I thought, this is fun, I should do one of these myself. And I started a book and sent what I'd started off to a few friends, one of whom was Terry Pratchett. And about 8 months later, I got a phone call from Terry, and he said, here, that thing you did, are you doing anything with it? And I said, no, I'm doing a comic called Sandman that's taking up all my time. And he said, well, either you can sell me the idea, or we could do it together. And as far as I was concerned, that was right up there with Michelangelo ringing you up and saying, yeah, that big block of marble you dropped off, it's really nice. Do you want to do a carving together? And you go, yes, of course I do. I'm not stupid. You are a master craftsman. I will learn from you. And I learned so much writing Good Omens with Terry. Most of the way that it was written was I was writing Sandman and several other things, so I probably wouldn't get to it until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I would write until about 5 o'clock in the morning on Good Omens. Then I go to bed, and then I would get up, and a little red light on the answer phone would be flashing. And I'd press a button, and a tape would rewind, because this was a very long time ago when things like that happened. And Terry's voice would come out of the machine, and he would say, get up, you lazy bastard, I've just written a good bit. And I would phone him up, and he would read me whatever he'd written that morning. And I would read him whatever I'd written much earlier that morning. And then we'd make each other laugh. And then it would just be a desperate dash to get to the next good bit before the other one could.
You appeared as yourself in an episode of The Simpsons. How did you feel about doing that?
It was wonderful. The Simpsons people had been threatening to put me in The Simpsons for at least 2 or 3 years before that. And I didn't think they were, I thought they were very nice people, and it was just a nice thing they said whenever they bumped into me. Oh, we're going to put you in The Simpsons. I was like, yeah. And then one day a script arrived. And I thought, oh, okay, they put me in. I know how this is going to go. It'll be one line. Homer's going to say, this is so weird, not even Neil Gaiman could think of this. And then you'll cut to me and I'll go, you're right, I couldn't. And I'll be yellow and have 3 fingers, and then you'll cut back to Homer. And I thought, that's how it'll go. And they sent me the script. And I pick it up and I start reading it. And I'm going, hang on, I'm all the way through this. All the way through this. I've got more lines. And I got to the end and I went, I was the bad guy. I plot. It's all about me. I'm evil. This is brilliant. So I was really enthusiastic, and I got to go into a studio. I was disappointed that when you go into the studio to record yourself for The Simpsons, you are not there with Homer and Marge and Lisa and Bart. You're actually in a studio all on your own with somebody recording and somebody else directing you. In my case, a man named Matt Selman, and say, okay, your next line is, that tuna isn't going to salad itself. And I'll say, that tuna isn't going to salad itself. And he'll say, no. Give it to me. That tuna isn't going to salad itself. I go, okay, well, that tuna isn't going to salad itself. No, do it more like Neil Gaiman. I am Neil Gaiman. Do it more like Neil Gaiman. And, we do it like that. And it was really fun. And I loved the episode. I think it's just so silly. But I also love the episode because it's actually an episode about 2 things. It's about people coming together in groups and making art and doing things they couldn't actually make if they were on their own, and about people who think they're selling out. They think they're doing hack work, but actually they're doing something they care about, and they're willing to fight for the thing they care about. So I loved that. And I also love the fact that you've got the little Lisa Simpson plot about just procrastinating, about wanting to write, but before you can write your novel, you obviously need to alphabetize all of the herbs in the spice rack. Because that's what you got to do. And now you should probably take a bath, because if you're going to write the novel, you need to start it clean. And for that matter, so there is a sort of weird procrastinatory thing. And that's true too. So I love the fact that the Simpsons episode has both of those things going on.
When Coraline came out, the film,
Yep.
basically, me and my friends was talking about it, and they said it was Caroline, and then I thought it's Coraline. So then we got this big argument about it, and it's basically just confused. How did you decide to call it Coraline instead of Caroline?
I called it Caroline because one day, a long time ago, I was writing a letter to somebody named Caroline, and I got the A and the O messed up. And I wrote Coraline instead of Caroline. And I looked at it, and I thought, that actually would make a great name. I like that. It's beautiful. It means like coral. It gives you the idea that there's something wonderful underneath and something beautiful. And if you called somebody Coraline, everybody would get it mixed up, and they'd call them Caroline. They'd think it was a typo, or they'd just read it too fast. So I love the idea of somebody for me, there's always that one thing that you hold on to at the beginning of a book. And the thing that I held on to was just the idea that people are going to get her name wrong. And they all call her Caroline. And nobody notices that it's actually Coraline. Thank you, guys. Those were great questions. It was fun. You could all be journalists.